Today we are taking a deeper look at Cuba, its current crisis, the political changes in Venezuela, and the island's increasingly complex relations with the United States, Russia, China, and major Latin American countries such as Mexico and Brazil. Cuba remains one of the last communist states outside Asia and has been governed by the Communist Party since the 1959 revolution led by Fidel Castro. In recent years, however, the country has faced severe economic difficulties caused by declining productivity, shortages of foreign currency, U.S. sanctions, weak tourism revenues, infrastructure problems, and especially energy shortages. The situation worsened dramatically after the collapse of Venezuela's support system. For many years, Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro, supplied Cuba with subsidized oil in exchange for Cuban intelligence, medical, and security assistance. This alliance became one of the foundations of Cuba's survival after the fall of the Soviet Union. That arrangement began to unravel after major political upheaval in Venezuela. Earlier this year, Nicolas Maduro was removed from power during a U.S.-supported military operation that dramatically changed the political balance in the region. Venezuela's new authorities have since moved toward improved relations with Washington and Western financial institutions while attempting to restructure the country's enormous debt and revive oil production. For Cuba, the consequences were immediate and severe. Venezuelan oil shipments sharply declined, worsening blackouts and fuel shortages across the island. The United States then increased pressure further by threatening sanctions or tariffs against countries supplying oil to Cuba. As a result, Cuba is now experiencing one of its worst economic crises in decades. Reports describe long blackouts, transportation disruptions, shortages of food and medicine, and growing public frustration. Relations between Cuba and the United States have become increasingly tense under President Trump. The administration accuses Havana of cooperating with American adversaries, including Russia, China, and Iran. Washington has expanded sanctions, intensified economic pressure, and openly discussed the possibility of major political changes inside Cuba. Recent reports also indicate that the U.S. Justice Department may seek criminal charges against former Cuban leader Raul Castro, connected to the 1996 Brothers to the Rescue aircraft shoot-down incident. At the same time, there have been unusual diplomatic contacts. CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently traveled to Havana for rare meetings with Cuban officials, reportedly delivering a message that the United States could consider dialogue if Cuba undertakes major economic and political reforms. Cuba's relationship with Russia remains strategically important, but increasingly complicated. Since the Cold War, Moscow has viewed Cuba as a valuable geopolitical partner near the United States. Russia maintains intelligence and military cooperation with Havana, and American officials frequently point to Russian intelligence facilities in Cuba as security concerns. However, Russia's ability to provide large-scale economic support appears more limited than during the Soviet era. Moscow has supplied some oil and diplomatic backing, but analysts suggest Russia may not be able or willing to fully rescue Cuba's struggling economy. China has also become increasingly important to Cuba. Beijing sees Cuba as both a symbolic political partner and a strategic foothold in the Western Hemisphere. China has expanded trade, infrastructure investment, telecommunications cooperation, and diplomatic coordination with Havana. Still, China has generally acted more cautiously than Russia. Chinese officials continue expressing support for Cuba, but Beijing also wants stable relations with the United States and may avoid direct confrontation over the island. In Latin America, Cuba's traditional alliances have weakened compared with earlier decades. Left-leaning governments in countries like Mexico and Brazil remain sympathetic toward Havana and oppose harsh U.S. sanctions, but they are also cautious about directly confronting Washington. Mexico, in particular, has attempted to maintain pragmatic relations with Cuba and at times supplied fuel shipments to help ease the island's energy crisis. However, new American measures threatening tariffs on countries supplying oil to Cuba have complicated that relationship. Brazil's position has also evolved over time depending on political leadership. Some Brazilian administrations emphasized closer ties with Cuba and regional independence from Washington, while others aligned more closely with American policy. Today, Brazil generally supports diplomacy and regional stability while avoiding direct involvement in the growing U.S.-Cuba confrontation. Across Latin America, many governments remain concerned that escalating pressure on Cuba could produce humanitarian problems, migration crises, or regional instability. At the same time, few countries appear willing to openly challenge the United States in the current geopolitical climate. Cuba, therefore, finds itself in an increasingly difficult position. Economically weakened, diplomatically isolated, and caught between major global powers during a period of rising international tension, the future of the island may depend on whether Havana can successfully balance relations with powers such as Russia and China, while also finding some form of accommodation with the United States and neighboring Latin American countries. What happens next in Cuba could become one of the most important geopolitical stories in the Western Hemisphere over the coming years.